Hey, everybody, welcome to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday DFS version. I was going to play an intro there, but something else popped up, so we're going to go straight into it and just, it's week one. We'll figure it out by week two. Sorry about that. More than anything, we got football. We've been talking about drafts all offseason. We talked about DFS strategy, done all this stuff. We have games, we have slates, we have salaries, we have matchups, we have over-unders. Andrew, I'm looking forward to it. How's everybody? How are you this morning?
I'm good, yeah. Everything feels like very real now. It just felt like we were starting to get ready, and it was like, oh, wait, there's still so much time left. And we finally made it.
We did. There was a game last night, and in rare form, we actually had a really fun opening that game. Usually they end up kind of being weird, but a really fun back and forth game. Probably a game Dallas should have won if they had a kicker that can make some kicks. But, Tom Brady with a minute and a half on the clock needing a field goal. It's at that point you're like, yep, I can shut this off because I know what's going to happen, and he did it again. So, but we're going to talk Sunday slates every week. That means that we're going to skip talking about the Thursday night game. We're talking about Sunday night this week. That's Chicago at the Rams. Monday night's not going to be on our main slate. That's Baltimore and Vegas, unless we have some ridiculously huge thoughts on those games. We probably won't hit on those very much just because we're kind of concentrating on the main slate. I'm Scott Jenstad. It's just at the top. Thanks to WinBet for sponsoring the podcast. Andrew, anything intros you want to make before we kind of jump into the slate? I think that everybody kind of knows who both of us are. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. Anything you want to say before we kind of look at week one?
Yeah, I'm going to warn everyone that we've been talking about changing the format of this podcast. And, obviously we're still talking about week one of the NFL season, but I think instead of going through positions by position, which we're trying to basically lump in cash game and GPP conversations, and I'm going to attempt to think that we found a better way to do it. We're going to find out, as we obviously haven't had a slate to try this out on, but I think we're going to try to concentrate more on like a cash game discussion for a little bit, and then a majority of the conversation to be about GPPs, just because I think more people are interested in how to win $1 million as opposed to $3. And so hopefully this new format pushes them in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it's also we probably ended up talking about too many players before, just because we got we're talking about every position and then guys' names come up. I still have a lot of players to talk about, so I don't know if we'll still hit a lot of players, and we're not going to skip guys, we're not going to skip games, but I think it'll help a little bit towards not just listing too many players and kind of maybe narrowing it down for you a little bit, which should help out, and so hopefully it'll work. But let's look at the slate. We've got 13 games on the slate. Obviously, the full slate with just the 3 primetime games. We got 13 games on Sunday. 9 of those are at the 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific slot, and then we got 4 games in the later window. So pretty good setup. We talked about the primetime games that we'll be skipping, but let's jump into some look at some of the games in terms of the totals. Obviously Vegas over/unders are a prediction of what Vegas thinks the total of the game will be. Both teams scored points scored combined. Obviously, a high total means we should have we're anticipating more offense. Low total means we're predicting more of a defensive game. It's a good starting point to see like what games we may want to stack in DFS, what games we may want to target some players, and when games we want to avoid games. We've got some. There's one game that's a 41.5 over under. So that's a game that you probably you may want some one-offs there, but maybe stacking's not the best idea. But let's start at the top. We've got the always high total Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, they score a lot of points. Their defense is pretty good, but they do get some shootouts. They're playing the Browns this week. Really good game. We have some good games on the slate this week. Cleveland at Kansas City, over under a 54, which is a really high number. Usually we see every once in a while we see some 55, 56, 57s, but 54 is a pretty big number for week one.
Yeah, for sure. And it's obviously one that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in. It's, we'll go into some strategies a little bit later of like whether that's a game that you should prioritize or not. But yeah, anytime the Chiefs are on it, you're going to have, people going that direction because it's just kind of fun to have Patrick Mahomes on your team and whoever's going to catch those passes. So yeah, I expect that game to be fairly popular, especially because there's some interesting run backs that you can use from the Browns side.
Yeah, and I think even maybe more popular than usual because we do have, what we should have said at the top, that these salaries came out a month and a half ago. So we do have some cheap guys that wouldn't have been as cheap. One of them we lost this week. I think Gus Edwards would have been really popular in DFS, but obviously he tore his ACL, or they think so. MRIs today, but he's not going to play this week. But this is a week where you can probably get in maybe an extra expensive guy because there are some really, really dirt cheap guys that we'll talk about. Next up on the high totals, a game that I really like in terms of trying to figure out a way to play this is Arizona Arizona at Tennessee. Both of these teams, the over-under is 52. Both of the teams were in the top 6 in offensive plays per game. They both play really fast. You don't really think about that as Tennessee. You kind of think of them as kind of, Derrick Henry handing the ball off, but they do run a lot of plays. The Titans had the highest average game total in the NFL last year. I think it was like 58 points average, which is just, again, what you don't think, but they score a lot of points. Now they can pass. They have A.J. Brown and Julio Jones now, and they give up a lot of points too, which is, as we talk about games you want to stack, we're like, oh, this offense is great. You got to make sure that, they got to give up some points on the other side too. You want 38-35, not 38-7 when we're talking about stacking games. So that's a game that I actually like a little more on the total than I do the Cleveland Chiefs game. So that's probably my favorite game in terms of like the potential for getting a back and forth action here. Then later in the day, we have Green Bay at New Orleans. This is over under 50. I think it's an interesting game because we don't know what we're getting from New Orleans. This is the first year in forever. There's no Drew Brees. Michael Thomas is not playing. It's a different New Orleans team. I think we still think that Sean Payton will, find ways to score. They're starting Jameis Winston. We don't know how much Taysom Hill is going to be involved, but that over under is 50. Obviously, the Packers can score and the Packers can give up points too. So that should be an interesting one. But you look at the Saints. The Drew Brees missed 4 games last year. They scored 24 or fewer points in 3 of those 4 games. They really struggled without him last year.
Yeah, some of those games were Taysom Hill games, and I'm just like,
yep, for sure.
I just don't know how you can accurately, I don't think those are predictive of anything that we're going to see this weekend unless we end up seeing a lot more Taysom Hill than we all expect, and in which case that game could just be a dumpster fire from the Saints side.
Yeah, you got to think that if, Jameis won the job in camp, they're going to actually commit to him. They've said that Taysom's going to be more a gadget guy than not the backup guy. But my concern then is, every third and short, maybe he comes running on the field. And he did a lot last year. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But it'll be interesting to see how they kind of play it this year without Drew there. And then the last game I wanted to highlight on the high total is like 49.5. So kind of right at that 50 threshold that I use. It's kind of an arbitrary one, but one that usually splits the field up pretty good. Seattle at Indy, 49.5. Interesting game. Seattle tends to actually play well on these, go to the East Coast, play at 10 a.m. games that nobody plays well in. They're like 67% winners with Russell Wilson since they have been playing those games. But an interesting game because I don't think we know what we're going to get from Indy. We know what we're going to get from Seattle, but they have a new offensive coordinator. I think the shift to hand the ball off 100 times a game we saw in the second half last year, I think that's out the window with the new offensive coordinator.
You have to hope so.
Yeah.
But obviously it ends up being, most of us think that. And so maybe the contrarian way is to think that they're going to still do that. But yeah, all of these high total games are going to be ones that people are going to target. And I think one of the important things, at least for, the larger field GPPs, is you don't necessarily have to fade these games just to get different. You just have to figure out a different way to get access to those games. And, we'll discuss those because just based on the salaries of some of these players, there are going to be some that are very popular. And, if you have a few popular, very cheap cheap wide receivers or something, then we know everybody's going to go pay up for running back and quarterback because you have the money.
Yep.
And so one of the easy ways just to differentiate is pay up at wide receiver. And it's not like this is a slate where they're bad wide receivers. They're elite wide receivers. They just, may not be looked at as favorably as the high priced running backs because it's going to be easier to get the running backs because of the cheap wide receiver options. So there are definitely ways to get different. And these high total games have players that don't necessarily fit what I think is going to be kind of the more popular path, construction, because like we said, these prices have been out for a month. And so they just haven't, and they don't reflect kind of what the current situation is. So, when you have screaming values, people tend to run towards them. And then that just ends up pushing you in a specific line of construction that maybe, that in itself becomes chalky. And so just not doing that will give you enough leverage in bigger tournaments.
Yeah, especially week 1 when everybody's been drafting, Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey and Devontae Adams. The first thing you do is I want to play those guys in DFS also. Everybody's so focused on that first round of drafts as people do in season long. As you shift to DFS, I think a lot of people are just going to be really excited to play those guys plus Patrick Mahomes. And it's just it's a week where you got to think a lot of those big name guys are going to be pretty highly rostered.
For sure.
We got some low totals. I mentioned Denver at the Giants. That's 41.5. Which is our lowest total out there, kind of one of those games we just don't know what to get from either quarterback, Daniel Jones and Teddy Bridgewater. Denver's got some skill players, though, and they're actually well priced. I actually think this is a game that I'm not going to fully avoid. When we talk about cheap guys, we will get into it, but I think there's a few plays on each side here that might be mildly interesting for a total so low. We've got Miami at New England, 43.5. Jacksonville at Houston, another game I think there's some interesting plays, but 45. The Chargers and the Washington football team, 44.5. That's a really interesting game. The Chargers are actually favored by a point. That's moved around a little bit. I think it's kind of back to even now, but a little surprised the Chargers going on the road to the East Coast is going to be a little bit of a favorite considering how good the Washington defense is kind of hyped up to be.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's more of a reflection of the Washington offense than it is anything else. It's not like the Chargers are some dominant team, but I don't know. We'll see.
And then last but not least, low total, always your Jets at Carolina in a monster revenge game for Sam Darnold. Week 1, talk about narrative streak.
And Robbie Anderson.
Anderson, yes, that's true too. How are you feeling about Quick? How are you feeling about the Jets heading into Week 1?
I think they're going to be, I say this every year, they're going to be better than people think, but like nobody thinks they're ever that good. So it's like, oh, is 4 wins better than people think? Then maybe.
What's your win prediction?
5-11. 5-12. Excuse me.
You already failed the 2021 test.
I did.
I've done it like 1,000 times. Like, oh, that team's gonna be 10-6, and I'm like, I know, I get it.
No, yeah.
I think I think the Niners are gonna win 11-12.
That must be fun.
I'm pretty damn optimistic, which is scary because last year I was too, coming off the Super Bowl, and every single player tore a ligament by week 3. So it's amazing how, real quick, it's amazing how many like really good players Niners have. There's not one of those players where you're like, yeah, but he's a little bit injury prone. Like every single one. I mean, Debo, Ayuk, Bosa, Mostert, Jimmy G, obviously, like every key player of the team, maybe aside from Fred Warner, is like, yeah, but he's injury prone. So it's tough. Like 9 of 10 years, they've been a bad luck injury team. And you wonder at that point, maybe it's not bad luck. Maybe they're doing something wrong. But I'm excited now with everybody healthy, but we'll see by week 3 if we can stay upright.
There's nothing better than having week 1 hope, at least. If you're a Ravens fan, you don't feel quite as confident.
Wow. They've been just literally cursed these last 2 weeks. It's been
it's wild. Run. Absolutely wild.
One weird stat that I ran across as I was kind of doing these orders. We didn't talk about Minnesota and Cincinnati. They're kind of in that mid-range. I think they're 47-48. Did you know that Minnesota had the second highest average yards per gained on offense in the entire NFL last year? Second to Kansas City. I would have lost that bet, and it probably would have taken me a few guesses to get there. They averaged 410 yards a game, and I would not have guessed that based on how the season went last year.
I mean, if you really thought about it, you probably would have ended up there.
Right. You got Cook, Thielen, Jefferson, but
right.
I think I would have had probably 4 or 5 guesses before I got to Minnesota. They just don't, you're like, oh, Kirk Cousins. They just don't jump out to you a team that's like dominated on yards gained last year.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Cook obviously plays a pretty humongous role in that one. So, yeah, I probably would have picked like at least the Titans as like the one that may have been ahead of them that you may not have thought of. But...
I would have jumped to the Packers right away, probably. And just there's a bunch of teams that I would have thought of. But the Vikings, they give up points. And last year they had a lot of injuries on defense. They get healthy this year, but they're a kind of a sneaky team. When you look at that offense, you look at the defense getting healthy. They might be kind of an underdog team to win a bunch of games this year. So, but let's jump into the actual players in week 1. Now that we talked about the slate, but first a quick note from our sponsors, our exclusive sponsors at WynnBET. There's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire. It's making good decisions, and even more so making the right decision. Listen up. I have an incredible offer for you from Rotowire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more all at your fingertips. Want to break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down on blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for Rotowire's fantasy podcasts. So, Andrew, we're going to go week 1 here, but we're talking about kind of, I guess we'll call them cash lamps or optimal lineups, like who's going to be really popular this week, who's going to be in a lot of people's cash lamps, who's the people going to be gravitating towards. And I think the way to start there, and you kind of mentioned at the top, is Kansas City. I think that, you can get guys in this week. I think Patrick Mahomes will be the most popular quarterback. I think Tyreek Hill will be very popular. I think Travis Kelce will be popular, although he's really expensive compared to other tight ends. Yeah. He's 8,300. I'm talking DraftKings salaries here. We'll mention FanDuel also as we go along, but just kind of as a baseline. Tyreek Hill's 8,200. Patrick Mahomes, 8,100. Do you think a lot of people will be stacking this game? It's not only the Chiefs, it's not only Mahomes, but it's the highest over-under on the whole slate.
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes is always going to be popular, so there's that. Like, when you look at the other high-priced quarterbacks, like, he isn't, like, drastically different from guys like Kyler Murray or Josh Allen, and I think people just love the possible upside of Mahomes, and I don't think they necessarily will will fill the need to stack him with, either Tyreek Hill or Kelsey. I know McCole Hardman's much cheaper, and like people may want to try to go that route, but that for optimal lineups, it tends not to work out as well with him. But yeah, I think just Mahomes with how many weapons he has, that people are okay kind of playing him naked, as they like to say. And so, yeah, I think he's going to be really popular. But there are like a number of like cheaper guys that you could play, like cheaper quarterbacks, that obviously if you save money from at quarterback, now you have more to spend elsewhere. And so I think we're going to see kind of a drop between like Mahomes being pretty popular up top, and then we'll see a number of the lower price guys get pretty popular.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note, like even cash games at GPPs, at full slate quarterback, I don't worry a ton about ownership because our roster ships, all right, just because it's not going to be that high. We have 26 quarterbacks to pick from, and we're all coming off. Everybody plays. If you play Major League Baseball, you play golf, you play NBA DFS, like high percentages. This guy's 48% owned. Like Mahomes gonna be popular, is gonna be 15% owned, maybe up to 20 some weeks. But like I think there's so many options, and you can go down the list. You mentioned Kyler Murray, Josh Allen. There's so many quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, like everybody's playing this week, except for the primetime guys. But I just think that if you love Mahomes, you want to play him. I don't think you get off of him just because of the roster ship. Just because I don't think it'll be that super high almost ever with a quarterback.
Yeah, and mostly in like cash games, guys who are more popular are going to be are the ones you want. You don't necessarily need like 1% flyers in cash games. No. I mean, you can get a little more aggressive in like the triple ups and quadruple ups, but like for like a strict cash game, head to heads or double ups, 50-50s, like you just don't need guys who are untouched by everyone else. And so, yeah, if Mahomes is going to be popular, like it's okay to go with him and try to find out or try to like make up the ground elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the second guy up top here that's going to be really popular in cash games is Kyla Murray. We talked about how this is also a shootout potential game. He's 7,600. The dude was awesome last year before he had the shoulder injury. If you look at his first half before he got dinged up, I mean, it was really impressive. I think he was quarterback one in fantasy points. I mean, he had unbelievable floor just based on the rushing yards, the rushing TDs. Then you add the passing stuff on top of that. He adds some weapons. If you consider AJ Green a weapon, he adds a weapon this year. Adds Rondale Moore, who they drafted, and that's an exciting rookie. So should be stacked. James Conner in the backfield. I think as you get if you don't want to go Mahomes, I think Murray's going to be right there for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of plays in like the rushing floor that Murray provides is what a lot of people are looking for in cash games. And that's why I think Jalen Hurts is going to be pretty popular. Like Hurts is not going to throw the ball nearly as much as Kyler Murray, but he probably could run just as much, and he's significantly cheaper. So I think Murray is going to be one of the expensive quarterbacks that people are going to go to in cash games. But if you want to pay down, like I think Jalen Hurts is literally a poor man's Kyler Murray in terms of like salary, and that DraftKings, priced him as such.
Yeah, that's a really good call. I had him a little bit later talk about quarterbacks that I think you can play kind of as a standalone. You don't really necessarily need the stack. Where a lot of times, when you play Mahomes, we talk about him running, but he hasn't run a lot fantasy wise. Every once in a while, he'll run a TD, but he's not a guy that's going to run for 80 yards. Whereas Hurts and Murray can run for a bunch of yards, score a couple touchdowns. So I think those are guys I'm a little more willing to kind of play them, as you call it, naked earlier. And Hurts is 6,400, so that's a really good savings from both the top guys. Is there any really cheap quarterbacks that you think people may go to in cash in order to pay up everywhere else? So the guy for me that I looked at was Teddy Bridgewater. I think he's 4,800. Is there any like really cheap quarterbacks this week that you think people are going to gravitate towards in kind of the optimal cash lineups?
Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I mean we joked about the revenge game narrative, but going against the Jets, and Carolina's got really good weapons. I mean, they got DJ Moore, you have Robbie Anderson, you have Terrace Marshall, the rookie. He's got weapons at his disposal, and you got to think that he's going to want to. We didn't even mention you got Christian McCaffrey, who catches a few passes too. So I think Bridgewater and Darnold are the two that I think Darnold's 5,000, Bridgewater's 4,800. Those are the guys that jumped out to me. If you really want to save and spend everywhere else in your cash lineup, those are the two that I liked.
Yeah, the only other one I would add to the group, because I don't think Darnold will be overly popular as like the pay down, but I think people are going to look at Mac Jones as well, just because the Patriots. I think there's just this thought that like they'll be good enough. You look in the preseason, not that I want to read too much into that, but it's a good game environment for them. And so, yeah, Mac Jones, if you don't want to have to rely on Sam Darnold, I get it.
Yeah, when we talk cheap quarterbacks, I really like to get guys who I love their receivers because a 5-yard pass turns a touchdown really fast. And I love the weapons that Darnold and Bridgewater have. I mean, I love Denver's receivers, and I'm not sure that New England got a bunch of guys that if Mac Jones throws an 8-yard pass going to break a touchdown off it. And I like that for a cheap quarterback, so I'd lean to the other two for the weapon reason.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, it's very difficult to make the argument that DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson are going to and McCaffrey are all these great receiving options and not think that Darnold could succeed.
Right.
Like if they succeed, Darnold succeeds. And that doesn't mean he's going to throw, 350 and 4 touchdowns, but at his salary, you don't necessarily need him to do that anyway.
Right. So I think as we talk cash lineups, like the expensive running backs are always kind of the key point. People really try and get those guys in there. They have huge floors. They have bigger floors than receivers do, just because they're always touching the ball as receivers. Aside from Devontae Adams, a little variable in how many targets they get per week. But Christian McCaffrey's really expensive. We've got Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara, kind of the 4 guys that I think are the kind of pillars of the running back. If you want to really pay up for a guy in cash this week. I think McCaffrey's going to be way less popular just because he's the most expensive. I think Dalvin Cook kind of tops the list of where everybody's going to go first.
I disagree. I think McCaffrey's still going to be super popular, at least in cash games. Like I think, so the weird thing is that there are enough cheap wide receivers that if you wanted to play McCaffrey and Cook, you can. Like there are plenty of reasonable builds. They usually include one of those cheaper quarterbacks that we're talking about. And I don't know if you can pay up for any of the wide receivers, but there's normally in optimal lineups, you see 3 running backs because they have much higher floors than wide receivers. And so these are the guys that have the highest floors. Like that's why they're the most expensive. And obviously, there's plenty of upside. McCaffrey against the Jets is that's the matchup that anybody wants any week. And so I think he's going to be popular, but that doesn't mean that I think Cook is a bad play. I think they're both going to be very popular. And I think you're going to see enough lineups where people have both of them, because we'll get into the wide receivers later, but there are a ton of wide receivers you could get away with. Yeah. They're certainly riskier, but you just have to hope that the risk is mitigated by the high floors of McCaffrey and Cook, who I think are going to be more popular than Henry and Kamara. The Kamara thing is interesting to me because
I go Kamara $900 cheaper over McCaffrey pretty easily this week.
Kamara over McCaffrey?
Yeah. I'll take the $900 and go.
So there's no concern that Jameis just doesn't dump down to Kamara as much as Drew Brees did?
I think there's definitely concern about that, but without Michael Thomas in there, I just think that he is so far and away their best player that I think we always worry about Kamara because he doesn't get handed the ball 100 times like a lot of the Derrick Henry's the bell cow back kind of stuff is clearly there with Henry. I just think that Sean Payton is too good at offense to not make sure that Kamara touches the ball a freaking ton. It's a game where they're going to have to score, and I think that Kamara's going to be on the field a bunch. I think they're going to have to catch up in the second half. Green Bay's going to score in this game. New Orleans has some complacent defense. Green Bay's going to score. I think you mean $900 savings. I'm going to go there. Over McCaffrey this week. I think I could like Derrick Henry more too for $700 less. I know he doesn't get the PPR boost, and that really matters in DraftKings. Obviously, we should have said at the top, DraftKings is full point PPR, FanDuel's half point. So, Henry's not Henry was historically good last year. He was the 3rd best running back in PPR. So it's crazy to think about that. But he was RB3 last year. But the Cardinals allowed 4.6 yards per carry last year. I know they're a different defense. They've drafted guys. They got J.J. Watt. But I just think with this game, I think his floor is probably higher than everybody else just because he's guaranteed to touch the ball so much.
So Ryan Belangi took over our tournament guide, the DraftKings tournament guide on the site, which I highly recommend anyone to check out.
A week after I said how good you were on it nationally on the podcast.
No, I didn't. I never did. This is Jerry's article from a few years ago.
Oh, I got you.
So this is the full slate one. But you're right. I'm not doing the single game. Ryan wrote that one as well.
Yeah.
But so he wrote that he thinks Henry, and we were going to get into GPPs in a little bit, but he thinks Henry is the best leverage play because of everything you just said. He's going to get the touches. It's a nice matchup, high total. But if everybody is trying to play McCaffrey and Cook and Kamara, that's just fewer people who are going to play Henry. And so, yeah, I think
I agree with this thinking, except I think that McCaffrey's that guy. I think everybody's going to try and play Cook, Henry, and Kamara. So it'll be interesting.
Okay.
You're right, though. McCaffrey just sticks out to people. I do get that. But I thought the same thing. I just thought that maybe McCaffrey was that guy. I thought that for just based on the price, I thought maybe people would slide down $700 and go to Henry and Kamara. But I mean, these guys are clearly the four that I think everybody will be attacking at some point, both in cash and GPP. I mean, it's not like these are only cash plays by any means. I mean, there'll be a lot of really good GPPs with one or two of these guys too.
Yeah, I think the only reason why McCaffrey will still be popular is that the $700 doesn't matter on this slate. There's too much value that you don't. I don't think you're going to be like, man, I wish I had 700 to get from this guy to this guy. Like, I actually think that in terms of like median outcomes for the cheaper wide receivers, are all close enough that you're just like, oh yeah, let me just play McCaffrey.
Someone asked in the chat about the 49ers pass offense. I promise we will get there very, very shortly. I have a lot to say about that too. Let's talk about receivers real quick with kind of our cash optimal lineup. We talked about Tyreek earlier. I think, this is going to be a very playable 8,200 high scoring game. Devontae Adams, I think we don't really need to get that deep, like gets the ball a ton. Aaron Rodgers loves to throw 1-yard touchdowns to him to boost his stats, and that helps Devontae Adams. He's 8,300. I think that everybody is going to gravitate toward Terry McLaurin just based on the price. He's 6,400. We talk about drafts and how that impacts a little bit. Everybody's been drafting McLaurin in the end of the second round, early third round. You see him at $2,000 cheaper than these top guys. I think a lot of people are going to gravitate there. The Chargers are really good against receivers. At least they were last year. They get Derwin James back. But I think that McLaurin's going to be very popular when people kind of gravitate towards that price.
Do you like him more or less? Well, actually, you didn't even say if you liked him. You just think people are going there. But do you think he's a better play than DJ Moore, who's cheaper?
I never think anybody's a better play than DJ Moore. I think the McLaurin has a better floor built. And the key with McLaurin is, like, he gets open all the time. You can't cover him. And he actually has a quarterback, A, that will throw him the ball now when he's open, but B, will force the ball to him. Ryan Fitzpatrick loves forcing the ball to him. We talked about that a couple years with Jameis. Like, people are like, oh my God, Jameis throws 30 picks. I'm like, yeah, but think about his receivers. Like, you want the guy to force the ball in there. Yeah. You get these like Tyrod Taylor that will never force the ball downfield to a specific receiver. Like, as if there's a receiver that you have in your team, you want the quarterback, even if it's a bad idea, you want him to throw the ball double coverage because that's a target, that's a chance to make plays. And I think that Fitz is very willing to fit that in. There are other receivers I like more this week. We'll talk as we get into GPPs. There's some other game stacks that I really, really like that don't include McLaurin. But I just think the price, like, he just sticks out as so much cheaper than everybody else kind of in his talent range.
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of guys that you can play. Like, I don't necessarily think that any of the really expensive ones, whether it's like Adams or Hill, are going to be that popular just because we'll talk about them in a second, but there are like literally minimum priced wide receivers that you can play that I think you can get away with. And for every one of those that you play, it's, taking a roster spot away from one of the expensive ones. So it's really just a matter of like how far you want to go with your running backs. We kind of skipped a few guys that I think we'll see popular in cash games, but like, I think James, just to go back to running backs for a second, like, I don't think we could have a podcast without mentioning James Robinson, just because like, I think he's going to be very popular, and he's not all that expensive versus like the Cook and McCaffrey, but you can afford guys, you could play all three of those guys, three of Cook, McCaffrey, Kamara, Henry, Robinson. There are cheaper guys. We have this Niners thought, but like Mostert, would you play Mostert in cash?
I'd like him more at GPP probably, but yeah, I think that the way they're gonna want to run the ball against Detroit, like I think both him and Trey Sermon are usable in cash too. I just think that I don't know who's gonna get the touchdowns is always a problem. Mostert probably has to break a big one to score, but he can't do it at any point. He was the fastest running back in the league. But I think inside the red zone will be Trey Sermon. So I think both those guys are playable in a game that the Niners should run for 200 plus yards.
Right. Yeah. And one of those where he gets like 86 on one play.
It's very possible. I'd be surprised if he doesn't hit a big one at some point. I think there's a lot of running backs, and we'll talk about a lot of them in the GPP segment. There's a lot of like mid-range running backs. One other running back that you mentioned I want to ask you about. Javonte Williams is 4,000 with Denver. So he's a guy that we don't really know how the backfield's going to break out. He didn't play last week, or the last preseason game. If you can play that either way. You can be like, oh, well, that's kind of weird. Like, why didn't they want to give him action? Or maybe like he's the starter. They don't want to get him hurt in that last preseason game. Is the other way you could look at it. Melvin Gordon is there. I assume week one, they'll probably lean a little more on the veteran than we want them to do. That's the one thing that worries me about John Devontae Adams. But you look at the talent, potential role, like 4,000 for a running back is something you got to consider.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering. There's probably a few too many like question marks.
I agree.
For cash, at least right away, now. And the problem is like when we finally are comfortable playing him, he's going to be 6,800 as opposed to 4,000. But yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to go that low. There are just other guys that are still cheap that maybe aren't quite that low, but like, Antonio Gibson or Mike Davis, people will consider.
Antonio Gibson's price is absurd. I don't know why he's 5,900. I mean, that's a guy that is really good. We talk about drafts, too much in week one, but I mean, he's like end of the first round, early second. I think people are going to gravitate towards that price too.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a way to do it, but it's more like, so that's kind of the decision you make. Like, do you want to play one of those expensive running backs that we were talking about, or two of them, plus one of these cheaper guys, Mostert, Davis, Gibson, Chris Carson, even like weird guys like that.
You love Chris Carson. That's your boy right there.
It was probably just one successful week, and that's why I do it. But like, if you play more of the cheaper guys, then obviously you're going to get more of the guys like Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill. And if you play more of the expensive running backs, now we're going to start talking about Marquez Callaway and Jerry Jeudy and guys like that you're going to have to play because you don't have money necessarily. But like, could those guys score enough as wide receivers that you get the safety of the higher price running backs?
So we talk about what we call free squares sometimes, spots that everybody's gonna roster somebody, and usually because in mid-season, like it's because a running back got hurt on Monday, and all of a sudden, the starting running back's 3,000. We talk about free squares this week. I think Marquez Callaway, who you just mentioned, is probably the guy. He's going to stick out huge to people. 3,400, had a huge preseason. Michael Thomas is not playing. He's the number one receiver for the Saints in a high over/under game, and a team that is always a good offense. We don't know how they're going to be with Jameis, but we assume they're going to throw a lot. We talked about Jameis likes to force the ball. I mean, he's going to push the ball downfield to Callaway a couple times, which you'd love to see. I think he's the biggest quote-unquote free square this week as you look at the slate.
Yeah, I think that fundamentally it doesn't even matter who it is. But you're just like, this is a team in a game with a 50-point total or whatever, 50, I forget where that one is right now, 50 and a half.
Yeah.
In 50-point game, he's wide receiver one, a team that likes to throw the ball. That's it. It literally doesn't matter who the guy is. You just click that guy in and you play.
And you can look at, I know that Jair Alexander is one of the better cornerbacks in the league, but you got to think that Sean Payton moves him around a little bit. The people have been raving about him in camp. He had a big preseason. Everybody saw the 2 touchdowns with Jameis. I think it was on one of the
national
prime time games. Like there aren't that many preseason ones, and that was one of the ones that everybody was talking about. 3,400, like he just wouldn't have been 3,400 if the pricing came out this week. There's just no way around it. He would be 5,300 or something like that. Right. I think receiver wise, we're going to talk about a lot of cheapies when we talk about tournament builds, but I think he's the guy that sticks out as like everybody's going to gravitate towards and kind of click. I think he'll be the highest rostered receiver under 7,000 or whatever. I
mean, he might be the most popular one.
He might be. I mean, period. Yeah, you're right. You probably will because there'll be some Tyreek and Devontae split. I think he's probably the highest. Real quick in cash game before we get into GPP, tight end is an interesting spot. You've got Travis Kelce. We talked about you can stack him with Mahomes. He's insanely consistent, like the targets and touchdowns. And if Cleveland plays their defense like Cleveland plays a lot of cover 4, kind of taking away the big play, and they did that last year against the Chiefs. And if they do that, those are the games where Travis Kelce really ate last year. I mean, he was like 8 for 109 against them in the playoffs, like early on before Mahomes got hurt. But there is someone at tight end who is really cheap and is like the 4th ranked tight end in fantasy drafts this year. Kyle Pitts is 4,400. Everybody loves the shiny, sexy new toy. He's 4,000 cheaper than Kelce. I think Kittle's kind of splits difference. He's like in the mid 6s. How many people are not going to click on Kyle Pitts at 4,400? I mean, he's essentially the weird part is we haven't seen him in the preseason. Like he caught one pass in the preseason. They played him like 5 plays. It was something crazy. Like he played very little. I get it. They don't want him to get hurt. But if you talk about, as you read stories, it sounds like he's more a wide receiver 2 than a tight end. And you get to play him at tight end at 4,400. How does everybody not click Kyle Pitts this week and just kind of move on to the next spot? So
I think not only does everybody play him, yes. Like I think he will be the most popular tight end. And, we always talk about how we look for like really cheap tight ends just to fill because, the range of outcomes for all of the tight ends really isn't that great.
Right.
If you like just graph them all out, they're all pretty tight as opposed to wide receivers, which are higher. That obviously doesn't include Kelce, but Kelce is basically wide receiver 1. So I think the fact that we have Kelce on the slate means that you could absolutely play like a 2 tight end lineup, which feels absurd.
Right.
I don't think people do it in cash, but if I think every time Kelsey's on the slate, you compare him to all of the wide receivers. And it's like at 80, what is he, 83? 83. Like he's the same price as Devontae Adams.
Right.
But like he should be. If he was a wide receiver.
We always talk about like upside receivers, but Travis Kelce has the same upside that receivers do too. I mean, he go 10 for 125 and 2 touchdowns. Like you wouldn't even blink at that. So I mean, he's the one tight end that you're right. You can play them. You can put him right with those Devontae and Tyreek guys.
Yeah. Like if you just looked at Kelce's stats, you would guess it was a wide receiver. And so that's fine. And so, yeah, but like Pitts at least is being treated as if he's better than all of the $4,500 wide receivers. And if you think Kelce is better than all of the other wide receivers, then like play both.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that Pitts, I mean, that price is, I'm surprised they priced him at low, considering everybody knew he's going to be a big part of the offense even before right after the draft. But it's a fascinating one. I think everybody's going to want to do it. He's the sexy guy. I think he's going to be very popular and probably do. I mean, A, you got to think they're going to get him touches. And B, I've watched him in college. Any touch he has can be a big play. So you've got a floor built in, and you've got a potential upside. A tight end at 4,400, like that's just hard for me to get away from.
I think everyone will be there. We all think that.
Before we jump into some other builds and stuff, is there any like defense that you think this week, like I'm going to play them in my cash lineup, easy, slot them in, let's call it a day and move on? Is it? The Niners are like the one that sticks out because they not only they own Jared Goff, but they should own the Lions, and they're really healthy. But they're 4,200. Are they too expensive to be highly owned? Yeah, and they're like 400 more than any other defense. I think the second highest is like 3,800, and then it drops way down. Like they stick out big time as the most highly owned. I mean, the Rams are off this slate, so that probably is why. But I just wonder, like everybody was want to play that against Detroit, and like I said, they own Jared Goff. He had over 200 yards in both games last year with the Rams, and now he has no weapons this year. Is there a cheaper D that you're going to go towards in order to save some money at the other positions?
Yeah, I always tend to look at opponent before I look at the actual team. Like I don't care who the team is; I just care who they're playing. And like the Jaguars at 2,700 at Houston,
the one I have on here. Yeah,
everybody will go.
Yeah, just price plus matchup and kind of move on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing with that is like Tyrod Taylor doesn't make mistakes because he doesn't do anything, which is always the problem. But yeah, I think that Houston's really bad.
No, I think that's a reasonable concern. But at 2,700, I think it's okay.
There are other defenses that I like more, and we'll get to them as we build a little bit later here. So let's jump into some GPP tournament talk. But first, a note from our sponsor. Playing fantasy sports is so much fun, but once you dive deeper, fighting against other players for a percentage of the pot, there might be sharks. Even when your fantasy team crushes it, those skilled pros might leave you without a single cent. Luckily, the days of having a great score and not getting loot are over. With Fantasy Stand, you're playing against the house. If you reach the threshold, you win. It's that simple. Sorry, baby sharks. To participate, choose a free or paid entry contest in the lobby. For salary cap, you get to pick 9 players while staying at or under the salary cap. For Pick'em, you simply pick 1 player from each tier they presented with. Done. Now sit back and watch the results to see if your fantasy team is what it takes to stand out from the rest. Come out as the high score, get ready for additional prizes. So where do you stand? Visit fantasystand.com to sign up today. So Andrew, let's start with talking some game stacks that we like. And when I talk game stacks, we're usually talking a receiver or a quarterback with a receiver, maybe a second receiver, maybe a tight end in there also. And then what we call a comeback, which is someone from the other team. So if you get a stack, you want, when I did well in a week, I had a stack like that where I had a quarterback, receiver, and tight end. All of a sudden your quarterback throws 4 touchdowns, 2 to each guy. And suddenly you're scoring on both. Like if the first one we'll talk about Russell Wilson, if he throws a touchdown, DK Metcalf, you get 2 touchdowns rather than just playing 1. So it's kind of obvious why you stack, but you want guys that you correlate well. And when big plays happen, you get multiple pieces of it. So my first stack I want to talk about is the Seahawks and the Colts. It's Russell Wilson. Your mileage may vary whether you want to go with DK Metcalf or with Tyler Lockett. They're both very playable. Lockett 6,700, Metcalf is 7,500. I prefer Metcalf because I think the touchdown stuff is better with him. He gets more deep balls. Lockett is a good can be a PPR monster with all the targets underneath, but I think Metcalf, you want those big plays. I think there's options to come back. I think Michael Pittman is going to be a popular low price receiver now that T.Y. Hilton's not playing. He's 4,100. But I think the new offensive coordinator should open this up this offense more. We don't know that yet. I'm kind of guessing. That week 1 is always the hardest week because we don't have stats to fall back on that we normally do. But you look at Russell Wilson was 26 points per game in the first half last year when they were really rolling on offense before they kind of took it away. I think he had that 8th game. He made a bunch of mistakes. They lost the game. That kind of changed the offense, which seems like a crazy overreaction. We talked about that bunch. But the Colts do play a lot of cover 2. The Seahawks struggled with that last year, but I think the new system they have maybe fixes that. Metcalf had 1,300 yards last year, 10 touchdowns, 83 catches. I really like this as a stack. If I'm going away from the Mahomes stack, I think Wilson and Metcalf is the one that I'm going to next.
Do you think you run back with a wide receiver more often than a running back?
It's tough because Jonathan Taylor we'll talk about, but he's 8,000. So I had a little trouble running that back and getting everything else I wanted to. I usually like a receiver because I want, if my stack's going crazy and I want the other team to have to be throwing. But yeah, I think if you want to be a little different, I mean, Jonathan Taylor coming back, and then we talked about all these like pillars of running back. Taylor at 8,000 sticks out someone that no one's going to play because everybody's going to go those top four. Then they're going to drop down to the guys you mentioned, Antonio Gibson, the Chris Carson, the Mike Davis guys. I think Jonathan Taylor gets really lost this week at 8,000.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The only issue that I have with that stack, in particular with Pittman coming back, I have no problem with the Seattle side. But it's like, I think this actually happened last year where we did the week 1 show, and I was like, there's a team that's projected for a good number of points, and all of the guys are cheap. And I was saying how I do these like blind stacks, and it was the Colts because I think either Hilton was hurt or he was cheap. Rivers was cheap. Pittman was cheap because he was a rookie. And it was just like, I can't get excited about the Colts. And here I am hearing this, and I'm like, yeah, Seattle sounds great. And it's like a run back with the Colts. And I'm like, I don't want to play any of these guys.
Yeah.
The numbers tell me I should.
Yeah, I think Pittman's okay. 4,100. He had a lot of targets in their playoff game. I think that he's kind of the guy. I don't think you're going to get explosion out of him, but I think you're going to get targets just because T.Y. Hilton's not there. And, they're still kind of building some guys into the offense. Obviously, Carson Wentz is going to be there. We don't know how healthy he's going to be. He might be limping around a little bit back there, but he's going to play. Pittman's not like my favorite guy in the slate, but I think if you're playing a comeback, I think the price is cheap enough that I think the targets will be there.
No, that makes sense. I think Seattle is at least one that I would probably just stack on their own. I don't necessarily need a run back, but the Matt and Chad here took out the one that I was definitely going to bring up, this Jameis Winston, Callaway, and then Adams run back. Like I think that game, any game with Jameis Winston, I feel like could go nuts. And so
I feel like the interesting thing with Callaway too is everybody's going to have him, but if you want to be a little different, you put him with Winston because I don't think that many people are going to play him with Winston. And all of a sudden you're doubling up on Callaway. And now every time Callaway does something, it's really, really good for you. Where before it was like, oh, that's good, but everybody has him.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this, like if you really like Robbie Anderson and you really like DJ Moore, then you kind of have to like Darnold, and everyone likes Callaway.
Yep.
But somebody's got to throw him the ball. We don't think it's going to be Taysom Hill, and that doesn't mean that like Winston's going to have a monster game, but like we have seen enough monster games from both Winston and the Saints offense that like it just makes sense to try that in a GPP. And the Packers you could go either way. If the Packers blow them out, then it's we could expect 25 carries from Aaron Jones, and that's your run back. And you just hope that, he gets the early touchdowns and then Winston's throwing the ball all over, or you do Adams in a back and forth.
Is there a quarterback more you want than Jameis Winston down 14 in the second half?
Totally. Absolutely.
Perfect. He will force everything. 2 years ago when he had the 30 touchdowns, 30 picks, like a lot of that came from the fact they were throwing a lot in the second half. And the Tampa defense was terrible that year, which is crazy that how good they got really fast. But you want that. Like there were so many late Jameis games with throwing to Evans and Godwin. You're like, oh my, the second half was insane. I remember being in an airport. It was that Rams-Bucks game. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Every play, Jameis just hucking the ball, and he loves to force it in. And it's what you want in DFS. So I think that works. There's another comment in the chat about someone played Ronald Jones because all the fantasy heads told him to. That was not me as a fantasy head. I did not promote Ronald Jones last night. I just want to get that out there in the world.
We've never been big Rojo guys. So.
It's a shame because I mean I think he's a good player, but like he fumbled the NFL, and you're kind of done after that, which is disappointing. And he fumbled like this on his first or second carry, so that was rough. But my next game stack. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what do you think about the other side if you went Rodgers and Adams and then a run like Callaway is the easy run back there? Do you play Kamara too?
Ooh, that's pretty sexy right there. Yeah, I mean, I think that if you really want to get spicy in GPP, you play Rodgers, Adams, Kamara. You don't play Callaway.
Yeah, it just seems like a trio that not a lot of people would play because they're so expensive. So now you're really going to have to find some. Callaway helps, but
everybody in that stack would play Callaway. So if you want to be different, you go different. You go different cheap receivers. We'll talk about some cheap receivers. I think there's some interesting pivots away from Callaway. Yeah, I like that. I mean, you give me Rodgers, Adams in a stack anytime, right? I mean, we talk about the guy who hones in on a target. I mean, Rodgers, and they do that play at the 1 yard line that's pretty much unstoppable, and Rodgers loves to audible to it because he's selfish. But I'm kidding. I'm fine with Aaron Rodgers. I'm kidding. But they had a historic amount of touchdown passes inside the 5 last year. A lot of those he did audible towards. So I mean, it works. So what are you going to do? But yeah, I think that works well. Next thing I want to talk about is Tennessee. We talked about Derrick Henry, but if you wanted to get away from Derrick Henry and kind of move, we talked about leverage. You want to move towards the Tennessee passing game. I think Ryan Tannehill at 6,500 with either A.J. Brown or Julio Jones. And this game does have an issue. You can come back with DeAndre Hopkins. You can come back with, you want to go cheap, like a Rondale Moore or A.J. Green, even if you think, the fact that he looked spry in the preseason is a good thing. But I'm kind of giving up on A.J. Green. But, he's still not that old. But you'd probably come back with Hopkins if you really want to try and massively stack this game. But I think a lot of people will play Derrick Henry, which means, people aren't playing the Tennessee passing game. The Cards secondary, if you look at their defense, is the weakest spot. They're a pretty good front seven, but they're weak in the secondary. A.J. Brown's probably the more big play, make touchdown guys. Maybe Julio's the more PPR guy, maybe get more targets. But I think they're almost the same price. If they were different, I think I'd think about Julio. But 7,100, I think I'd probably just go to A.J. Brown. And the interesting thing was Hopkins. Hopkins was kind of, he's not talked about as like the elite. He's still drafted up there, but we always talk about Adams and Hill. But Hopkins is 115 catches last year, 1,407 yards his first Arizona season. And that was with Kyler, being banged up in the second half, not being quite as good. Tennessee was killed by wide receiver ones last year. So if you go Tannehill, Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, I think you have a chance to really get fun in this game that I think is going to be very back and forth.
Yeah, so I'll plug Ryan Belangi's article again. Like, he wrote that this was his favorite game to stack. He thinks his favorite stack was Murray, Hopkins, Moore, and Henry on the comeback. But like, his point was just, you can go in a ton of different directions in this game. You play either quarterback. Both teams have multiple receivers that you could play. The running backs you could even play a little bit. I don't know how many people are really going to play Chase Edmonds, but that's a reason to play Chase Edmonds because a lot of people probably aren't going to do it. And so, yeah, I think that game could be very, very fun. And there's just a lot of ways that you can go that makes sense. And you usually don't always have that, like where you're like, oh, I'm like, I want to play this game, but I don't really want to play the passing part of it because, like if Derrick Henry is a fantastic play, people really are like, well, I don't want to like miss out on that. But like, that's a reason not to play him. And you can still get plenty of upside with guys like Tannehill and Julio or A.J. Brown. Yeah,
it's in that offense that if you do go away from the running back, it's pretty easy to go quarterback receiver and get pretty fun with it. And it's, what's great about DFS and fantasy is that Tennessee, Arizona is a really fun, great game that I look forward to watching, where like normally I'd be like, oh, great. Like those don't sound like fun teams, but like this is gonna be a fun game. In terms of stacks on a game that maybe a little bit lesser thought of, I think an interesting stack is in the Jacksonville-Houston game. Trevor Lawrence is 6,200. You could go back with the Laviska Shenault, who I love this year. I think that Urban Meyer is going to use him in a lot of different ways, both kind of short passes and targets, but also some end arounds. Kind of a way that a lot of like the Chiefs kind of use Tyreek Hill sometimes. He's not that level of player, but I think they're going to get really creative with how they use him. And then the thing with Houston is like their offense is going to be terrible, but they have one guy that you can kind of come back with. It's Brandon Cooks, and he's going to get a lot of targets. Tyrod Taylor's going to throw the ball to him a lot. They just don't have anybody else. And like with bad teams, I like a guy that's going to get a lot of targets. I think this is an interesting one that nobody's going to play. Trevor Lawrence looked really good in his last preseason game. Looked like he finally kind of got the offense. Shenault looked good in the preseason too. I get stats don't matter, but you like the guys are connecting a little bit. I think that Urban's going to use Shenault really creatively, and I think that's something I want a piece of. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a bunch.
There is no way I thought that was coming.
Beautiful. That is not a game. Isn't that good though?
Yeah. That's
what you pay me so much to be here for.
I think from a popularity standpoint, nobody will play that game.
Yeah. I like it. I think that game is quietly one that could get I don't think it's going to be back and forth because I don't think Houston can be back and forth. But I think that we talked about James Robinson. I mean, we always like him because he just gets so many touches. We don't know how that touch stuff's going to work out with Urban Meyer. I think is the difference there. And the thing that takes me a little off Robinson is they fed him so much. I just don't know if they're going to feed him like they did last year. But I don't know. I think I think with Lawrence and Laviska, this game could get a little good for Jacksonville, and then give me Brandon Cooks with like 14 targets and a bunch of the second half, maybe 10 for 80 in a touchdown game. And that'll play at his price coming back on a comeback.
Good luck with that one, Scott.
I like it. That's good. I like that. I left you speechless. Are there any other stacks you want to talk about before we kind of get some other players here?
So the one that I wanted to ask you about, because I'm actually not sure how to play this one, because the way that I want to play it doesn't make sense. But I really like this Falcons-Eagles game. And The problem is that I want to play Ridley, Pitts, and Hurts. Like, I don't want to play Matt Ryan, but I also don't want to play any Eagles run back.
Right.
So is it absurd to think that Ridley and Pitts have big games and Hurts outscores Ryan?
It's tough, right? Because if Ridley and Pitts both have big games, it gets really tough.
I mean, theoretically, like, I don't need both of them to have 300 yards. I don't need Ryan to throw for 500. And so if they like each get 100 and a touchdown, that's probably enough. And then if Hurts, runs for 120 yards and 2 scores, like, he should outscore Ryan. I
think Hurts is the one guy you can do it with, because I think the rushing yards kind of works out. And if he spreads the ball around, maybe you don't want any of those receivers. Like, none of those receivers, he's got some talented guys, but none of those guys stick out to me. Like, oh, I got to play Jalen Reagor this week. Like, I just don't get that. But I just worry that if Pitts and Ridley both do really well, like, Ryan kind of has to do well. But yeah, Hurts could outscore him if he scores 2 touchdowns rushing. Nobody will have that. Nobody will have that setup, so it kind of works well.
Yeah, I just can't decide if it's dumb or not yet. Like, I think it like.
Is it dumber than a Houston-Jacksonville stack?
No way.
I appreciate your honesty. I like that.
Yeah, I just think that we need to get more creative in terms of finding ways to get access to games that other people are not necessarily doing it. And it just makes sense to do Ryan. So even if I did play Ryan, it's like I have Ryan, Ridley, Pitts.
Who do you
am I running that back with Miles Sanders?
Do you come back with Miles Sanders, hope for a couple big plays? I wish there was an easier way to come back. So your Hurts thing is interesting, because that's the piece of that offense you do want. Yeah, I like that, because that's a game that sounds fun. It sounds like we should get some points in that game. That's an interesting way to play it. I like that. I like that more than you like my different ones. So that's good.
I think that's true.
You realize I'm texting you every time Trevor Lawrence throws a touchdown.
Every time. Yeah, that's fine.
Maybe even like an 8-yard gain, you might get a message. Yeah, I think that's a fun one. That's why we talked this through. I'm definitely going to look at that. And I think that doing it with Hurts is, because I had Hurts as the one quarterback that I do think, like, playing naked is a really good way to go, just because they have so many different, like, there's no one target focus guy, at least that we know of yet. Obviously, we don't have any games yet, but I think that Hurts is the one guy, that the quarterback that I play most naked, probably.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into the stack buckets that we're used to. It's usually like running back and defense, or quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, quarterback, 2 wide receivers, 1, whatever it is. And I know that, like, we rarely see a quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, running back. We don't see that a lot, which I think people, if you want to play Tannehill and Henry, like, I get it. But, like, using
that's not a really good correlate. That's always tough.
Right,
like,
right. There's the correlation doesn't.
If you want to go like Winston Kamara, I get that more than I would Tannehill, Henry.
Yep, Darnold and McCaffrey, that sort of makes sense. Yeah. But like a quarterback run back doesn't make sense. But I think it might in this particular case.
That's a fun one. I like it. I want to talk about a couple guys real quick, kind of expensive wide receivers and running backs that might kind of be lesser owned or lesser rostered. Sorry. You mentioned Jonathan Taylor earlier. I think that's just based on where he fits salary wise. Kind of go talked about it. And we talked about expensive receivers, and we haven't mentioned yet the guy who was the biggest rookie breakout last year. And I think it's because Dalvin Cook is going to be popular. He's going to be rostered in a lot of teams. I wonder this week if with Adams and Hill and Kelsey really popular, we already talked about them a ton, where Justin Jefferson falls in this. He's 7,700. I think anybody that plays Cook is not going to play Jefferson. I don't think you're going to play both those guys unless you think Minnesota scores 55 points or something. But he was 88, 1,407 touchdowns last year. Cincy did play the deep ball well last year, but that's a defense that I'm not scared of at all. I think that Minnesota should score in this game. I think Jefferson kind of slides this week as lesser rostered than we're kind of normally used to last year, because he started so low and he finally built up by midseason at some high prices. We played a lot of Justin Jefferson last year, talked about him a lot, and it's weird that nobody's talking about him this week.
Do you play him with Cousins?
Yeah. I think you play him by himself with no problem too. But yeah, if you want to get in this game and really be different and get something different, I think Cousins, Jefferson. I mean, he's got Adam Thielen still. I think if you want to, I think it's a really good leverage spot in the fact that I think Cook. I think Cook's gonna be a little more popular than you do, but I think Cook's gonna be popular. I think we can agree on that. And I think that moves people. I mean, no one's playing Cousins. There'll be some Jeffersons because he's a sexy, fun name. But I think if you I think people will look at this slate and be like, oh, there's Jefferson, but I can just play Tyreek or Devontae for $500 more. I'm just going to do that this week and play him with Cook, and that way I don't have to worry about it. I think that a lot of people are just going to get away from Jefferson. I think that he's going to slide through lower rostered than normal, and I think I like that for a guy that's this damn talented.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, just looking at Minnesota's like team total, like it's basically in line with the Falcons, the 49ers, the Panthers, like they have a higher team total than the Cardinals.
And we talked about last year, they put up a lot of yards, and I don't think they're thought of as particularly that way, but they're a really good offense.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And just what we were saying, if you are like, I need some of the Titans, and you go with Derrick Henry, and it's like, all right, then you can just zag with Tannehill. Yeah. That's exactly what you do with the Vikings. Yeah, you play Cousins and Jefferson. And do you think Jefferson is more popular than Thielen? Like, should we actually be playing Thielen?
I think he is. How much is Thielen?
Thielen is 7,000.
Yeah, I play Jefferson. If they're that close, I play Jefferson.
Do you think everybody does that? No, but neither of them I think are going to be overly popular.
No, I think more will play Jefferson than Thielen, though. But I just think Jefferson's so much better. But yeah, Thielen has that touchdown. I mean, he had crazy touchdown season last year. I kind of think that probably evens out a little bit between the two guys. I love Justin Jefferson, and it sounds like he's fine. He had the shoulder thing earlier in camp, but it sounds like he's fine. I just think he's such an elite player that is not going to be rostered as such this week.
Where are you on the T. Higgins run back?
I love T. Higgins. Love T. Higgins. I have been cheap receivers, our mid-range or cheap way to talk about, but 4,700. Jamar Chase is probably not quite ready to get full action. He's like talking about how the football is weird because it doesn't have stripes on it. Like, dude, like you haven't been catching an NFL football. Like, that's a weird. I get it. He's just like talking and it just kind of came out, but like a weird statement. Like, just don't say you can't catch an NFL football. Like, come on, dude. By the way, I love Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase is going to be a superstar, but I just think maybe it's going to take a few weeks. Rookie wide receivers, we saw them. Jefferson was obviously great last year. I love T. Higgins, though. I think T. Higgins is a monster. With Burrow last year, he had, I think it was weeks 3 through 10. He had 66 yards or more and like averaged like 17 points a game in that stretch before Burrow got hurt. I love him with Burrow. I'm
much more likely to stack that game than I am Jacksonville.
Okay, you clearly don't like my Jacksonville stack. We've established that.
I hope you win $1 million with a Jacksonville stack.
If it does, I'm sending you a LaVisca Chenault jersey.
Yeah,
and your son gets a DJ Chark one. So you guys are going to double score.
Perfect.
So let's talk about some cheaper options. But first, a note from our third sponsor, Vivid Seats. Preseason football has wrapped up for the regular season to kick off this week. Live events are making a comeback, and there's no better place to be than Vivid Seats to get back into the action. Grab your NFL tickets and cheer on your favorite team from the stands. Boy, does that feel great to say. Even better, they just launched a new and improved rewards program with free tickets for every fan. Earn rewards, ticket upgrades, and perks just for shopping. If you're looking for tickets to the game, your favorite artist, or the new show everybody's talking about, Vivid Seats has it all. Visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats. Experience it live. I got to tell you, just a side note, it is watching NFL games with full stands and college football games is so much, it's weirdly so much different. I don't know why that is, but it is so much more fun to watch with like that like actual real crowd noise.
Yeah.
So let's jump into kind of the mid-range a little bit here. We'll get to cheap guys, but mid-range receivers and running backs do you think you might play in tournaments? It's funny. We talk about all these stud running backs, and there's a couple of guys that are really priced down this week. We talked about McCaffrey and Henry and Cook and Kamara that are like 8,500 higher. Aaron Jones is 6,800 this week. Joe Mixon 6,200. You mentioned Antonio Gibson 5,900 and James Robinson 6,400. There's some really good players that are $2,000 cheaper than those top guys. Like Mixon is a 6,200 and he's a absolute bell cow back. Before he got hurt last year, they were using him a ton of touches. Yeah. Minnesota's front seven is good. Don't get me wrong. And I should also mention before I kick to you in this range, we have Raheem Mostert's 5,800 in this range in a matchup that is a dream matchup. We mentioned Mostert earlier as a guy that can hit a big play anytime. Fastest guy out there in an offense that has a ton of weapons now that they can't really focus on him. What are you doing in this mid-range? There are a lot of really interesting options here that I think are very playable.
I think I'm mostly avoiding it, to be honest, just because
Are you going is that because you're going too expensive backs or because you're going like 2-1 cheap back? Like, what keeps you away from this range? You're able to kind of avoid it.
I think it's just like the range is a little higher, unless I guess maybe I'm a little too aggressive on that because I think Aaron Jones is like the cheapest expensive guy that I play. If we're considering 6,800 expensive, like I think after that, not that all of those guys are the same, but when you start doing that, now you're either not playing two of the expensive running backs, which is okay. But I don't know. I think I'm maybe too confident in some of the cheaper wide receivers that I am willing to play them. And then all of a sudden I have this extra money. So it's less a do I think these guys are good plays, and more it's like, do I think that they're better than the wide receivers I can get that now let me have Cook and McCaffrey or something like that. And I think my builds tend to still go more optimally as opposed to trying for GPP upside. But these guys make a ton of sense for those who want to be able to get some better weapons in the other positions, because like you said, Mixon could have a huge game. Gibson could have a big game. Mostert could have a huge game. When the range of possibilities on these guys is just as high as McCaffrey and Cook and Henry and Kamara. And so
those guys have significantly higher floors, of course, but
right.
Talk about, I love Gibson. I love Mostert. I really like Joe Mixon. I like three of these guys a lot. I think that I will build some lineups where I have one of those top guys and then two of these running backs, something like that. I think that's playable in the cash lineup too. I do think that I think these guys are good enough that you could do that. Obviously, the floors are higher than the other guys, but the Niners is tough. Let's talk about the Niners real quick. Obviously, they are one of the bigger favorites. They're favored by 7.5. Survivor people are taking them, or Tampa Bay last night, which got friggin' lucky, which annoyed me, or maybe the Rams, something like that. But someone asked in the chat earlier about the Niners passing game. I love Ayuk. I love Samuel. I love Kittle. I love all those guys. I just don't think this is a week where I'm focusing on the Niners pass offense. I think that you never know how game scripts are going to go, but we've got to trust I think that they should get up in this game, and I think they're just going to run the ball a freaking ton in the second half. I think there's no reason. I like that some of those receivers to make a big play in the first half. You'll get maybe some plays on third down in the second half where, and you can always play Kittle or Ayuk or Samuel, and they always could hit a play. But I just think that it's going to be a week where you want the Niners run game, and that's Mostert. That's Trey Sermon at 4,500. I think they're going to see a ton of those guys in the second half, and I think Shanahan would love to run for 250 in this game.
So you stay away from the passing game?
I think so.
Ooh.
I love all those players, and individually, if you have a feel on Ayuk or Samuel and you want to play one of those guys at the price, I don't think that's bad. I just think this is a game where the Niners are going to want to run the ball down their throat over and over and over. And it's not as extreme as we saw 2 years ago in that Green Bay game. I get that it's never going to be that extreme, but I don't think Shanny really wants Jimmy to throw the ball all over the field this week. I just don't. I just think that I think they want to run the ball and they want to make a statement. I think they want to get up in this game. I think they want to play defense. I think they want to run the ball. And I love Mostert and Sermon. I think they're both very playable. I don't think I want to guess which receiver gets the big play this week, because I think there'll be very limited options for big plays. And I don't really want to get when I want the Niners receivers a week where they're playing Green Bay or Seattle or Arizona, where I think it's going to go back and forth. You have to score more. I just don't think that's this week for me.
Do you think that there's any extra value in Kittle since everybody's playing either Kelsey or Pitts?
Yeah, in a tournament, I think that Kittle is fascinating because everybody's going to go Kittle. Everybody's going to go Kelsey or Pitts, like you said. Kittle's in the middle there. Nobody wants to spend $6,300 on a guy that they may run the ball 40 times in the second half. Yeah, and he's obviously the upside is huge. He can make a big play at any point. He's as good as any of those guys. I think that you give me 4% owned this week.
Yeah, I think you nailed it though. That if the game plan should be to run it all over them. And
they're a team that if the game plan calls for that, will actually do it. We see other teams they're up 14 in the second half and they're still throwing. I don't think Shanahan will do that. I think he's going to run Mostert and Sermon every time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's really tough to see a Jimmy G ceiling game in this one. Even if he has a great first half, you could see him, 250 and 2 touchdowns in the first half, and you could see him finish at 285 and 2 touchdowns.
Something went really wrong on defense, or maybe, the way it happens is actually, Jimmy G throws a pick six, they get a punt return, in the game, suddenly you're down and you got to catch up. And then it's the NFL like that. Any team can beat you. They're a 7.5 point favorite, not a 17 point favorite. So that could certainly happen. I just don't, the way that I see this game going, I'm not playing the Niners pass offense. I hope it does well because I'm obviously a fan, but I don't see it. And I want you to know in the chat, there's someone that likes the Jacksonville game stack. So we are good to go. We are a green light on that one. You mentioned,
you guys can share the money.
Yeah, actually. Is there any cheaper running backs you like in a tournament? We talked about Javonte Williams already. Is there anybody else kind of under Antonio Gibson? Or I guess we talked about Sermon. Is there anybody besides Sermon or Javonte that jumps out to you as you might be playing? Because those are the two guys that I thought were cheaper that were playing.
Yeah, nobody that I want to play. There are guys who make sense. It's funny. I feel like we're going to do this every year, but Devin Singletary makes sense, but like, well, let me rephrase. Like the Buffalo, top running back makes sense, but like the way that they've been using them and Singletary himself, like that's not worth playing.
And they throw the ball so damn much, and Josh Allen runs the ball in from inside the 10. Devin Singletary can make a play anytime. It's so hard to get there with the Buffalo running backs.
Yeah, like that's like one of the weird things that stick out like in my blind stacks. I'm like, oh wait, this is like a heavy favorite. Here's a running back who's really cheap. Like I should play him. And then I'm like, oh no, I'm not playing Devin Singletary.
So how about before we get into the cheap guys at the end, the cheap receivers, mid-range receiver, we haven't talked about a lot. We talked about the high-end guys. We talked about Marquez Callaway. Who do you like kind of in like the 45 to 6,000 range? We got Deontay Johnson, 6,300. DJ Moore, we talked about a little bit, 6,100. One of my favorite players. Talking about both the Niners are both 5,700 and 5,900. I like Odell Beckham if you want to come back. I know you made a face. You always do when I talk about Odell Beckham.
That's exactly who I was going to say.
If you want to come back against the Chiefs, he's 5,400. I get that he's banged up, but right now he's healthy, and this is not a season-long event. We don't need to bet on OBJ's health. I mean, he might get hurt in the middle of the game, but I'm not betting on that. The Browns are going to have to throw the ball in the second half. I know they like to run the ball. I know they're going to start to establish the game by the run, but if you're going to beat the Chiefs, you're going to have to air it out a little bit in the second half, I would think.
No, yeah, I think Beckham is going to be really popular because I mean, not like most popular wide receiver, but I think anybody who plays the Chiefs and wants a run back is going to go with Beckham because of that price.
And he's still a name value guy, and he's really cheap. Like I think that as you're scanning the thing, you're like, oh my gosh, he's 5,400. Like,
yeah,
and
it looked like a mistake.
Yeah, and you thought it'd be 6,200, 6,300, something like that. You mentioned Jerry Jeudy earlier. He's 4,800, a lot of offseason hype. He had the second lowest catchable target rate in the NFL last year, which says a lot about Drew Lock.
Yeah.
We got Teddy Bridgewater this year. There is no doubt, I don't think anybody's mind, that Jerry Jeudy can get open. He's a fantastic route runner. Coming out of college, everybody talked about his route running, and it got old at some point, but he can get open. Teddy's not going to air it out really, but he can get him the ball in those 10, 15 yards patterns. I think that I love the talent of Jerry Jeudy. You have Cortland Sutton also. They have your favorite player, KJ Hamler, there also. So they've got some guys there. But 4,800 for Jeudy kind of sticks out as a pretty playable spot too.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely one that the area that people will be in. I mean, we have other guys in this range. I mentioned Hardman before. Hardman is obviously much further down the pecking order than Jeudy is. Corey Davis at 4,900. Can I pull that move here?
I mean, it's a guy that looks good with Zach Wilson. I think that's playable. And you mentioned T. Higgins right in this range. He's 4,700. I think I go Higgins over Jeudy and Corey Davis, but I think all three are on my sheet right now as guys I'm going to consider on Sunday morning.
I think there's a whole, basically everybody in this range. I guess Brandon Cooks is like a little above it. Obviously, that's a game we want to target. So, but yeah, I think this range is filled with guys that you want to play. And it's another one of those, like, if I play these guys, now I can play McCaffrey and Kamara.
So it's interesting you mentioned that this is, all these guys in this range. Does that mean that Devonta Smith at 4,500 kind of goes under rostered, considering he should get a lot of targets, should be a game? We talked about Jalen Hurts before. If I were stacking someone with Hurts, it would be Devonta Smith for me. I just think this guy's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring that up when we were talking about Hurts before, whether you play him alone. I think if you're like, I have to play somebody with Hurts, like I would refuse to play a quarterback without somebody.
Right.
You play him with Devonta Smith at least.
I think so too. And the price is right. 4,500. Like if he gets 8 targets, I think that works.
Yeah. Like I realize like Michael Pittman is also in this range. We talked about him before. Like I get it. It's not like an offense that I'm like, I need to get.
It's funny as we talked more about how many guys are in the 4,000s, I got less interested in Michael Pittman as well.
Right. What do you think about the non-Devontae Adams Packers guys?
One of them is one of my favorite cheaper plays this week, and one of my Marquez Callaway pivots, and it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling at 3,700. I know that summer reports are blown out of proportion. I do get that, but every report you read from Green Bay is how awesome Marquez Valdes-Scantling looks. And if you want a great quarterback, you want a guy that can hit a big play at any time. He might drop it, but he's probably going to get a couple of deep balls. 3,700 for a guy with Aaron Rodgers in like the third highest over-under game. Great rave reviews in the camp. Upside is legit with this guy. Like a lot of these guys at 3,000, you're like, oh, can he really do that much? Valdez-Scantling can go 4 for 120, hits a couple big plays pretty, not easily, but it can happen. You have to think that the Saints do as much as they can to double Devontae Adams as much as possible. I like MVS a lot. And I think he's a really interesting pivot away from Callaway in the same game.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great call. And he's going to drop at least one, and you just have to hope that he drops like the fourth target and not the first one.
Because if he drops the first one, A-Rod will never throw the ball back.
He's done. Yeah. That's a 35 target game for Devontae Adams.
It is. I like that down here. An interesting other guy in this mid-range that I think is completely lost at 4,500 is actually Tyrell Williams in Detroit. The Lions have no receivers. They have TJ Hawkinson. We'll talk tight ends in 1 second, who's interesting at the price also. They have no receivers. He's the number one receiver. If we talked about the game script in this game, if the Niners are running the ball the whole second half, that means Detroit's throwing the ball the whole second half. Jared Goff's going to run the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. I think you could get a lot of 10 to 12 targets to Tyrell Williams. I don't know. We have Amon St. Brown there too. I just don't know how this Lions share is going to work with the targets. We just don't know. And I can't pretend to know. That's the hard thing about week 1 is we just don't know what's going to happen. But if you want to play someone who is very, very low rostered in this range, because there's so many guys in the 4,000s everybody's going to love. Everybody's going to gravitate towards Higgins and Judy. I think Tyrell Williams is really sneaky in a tournament that he's going to get a lot of targets for a cheap price that no one's going to have.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable call.
Reasonable. That's a ringing endorsement. Is there anybody else in the 3,000s? We talked about, the rookies, Elijah Moore, Rondell Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones. There's a lot of buzz in camp. If you wanted to run back someone on the Browns, he's 3,000. He's their third receiver, so that does make it tough. He's got to hit a big play for it to work. But, I think that they're going to need some big plays, and he's clearly another guy that's really shown well in camp. Jalen Waddle was a top 10 overall pick. He's 3,600. Wasn't used a lot in the preseason, but I think that's more of an indication that they want to save him. I don't think he's bad at the price either, but I'd probably go. It's hard to go away from Callaway and MVS for me. I just like those two guys the most in this range.
Since I'm completely biased on it, is Elijah Moore really a play?
3,000 with some targets. I mean, I'm probably not playing him, but yeah, I mean, when he's that cheap, everybody apparently really likes him. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about him or know. I mean, I know what everybody else knows, but how they're going to use him, I don't really know. And I tend to be a little bit scared of guys in their first games. I do like Devonta Smith just because I think he's just that good, but
so you do a Darnold, Robbie Anderson, Elijah Moore run back?
Sure. I mean, that could
nobody's
work.
winning money with that.
Nobody's winning money with that. But
I'd rather play Jacksonville.
If you put DJ Moore in there, then maybe it works.
Oh, okay. All right.
Magic bean right there. What about tight ends? We kind of hit everybody I want to talk about already. You talked about the thing I was going to bring up with Kittle is nobody's going to have him because of Kelsey and Pitts. What about TJ Hawkinson? He's 4,900, really cheap. And again, a game that we think Detroit's going to have to throw the ball a lot in the second half. Fred Warner's a really good cover linebacker, so the matchup is not great. But if Hawkinson's getting a bunch of targets that throw the ball in the second half, 4,900 is pretty cheap for him.
I think you could make the same argument for every tight end on this slate, not named Pitts and Kelsey, that nobody's going to play them, so you can play them. So
I just think Hawkinson's a little better than those other guys we talk about.
I think he's I don't think he's all that different than Goddard or Noah Fant. Yeah,
I guess I put him in a
targets
tier.
Are probably higher there.
I put him in a tier higher, especially because, as we mentioned before, they literally don't have an NFL wide receiver on their roster. It's rough.
No, that's absolutely fair.
That depth chart is rough.
Yeah, I think from a target perspective, he makes more sense on those guys. But when it comes to these tight ends, they absolutely need a touchdown in order to get you to the top of a GPP, and now you're relying on Jared Goff to throw touchdowns against the 49ers.
Anybody that's listening to us knows that I'm a big Noah Fant fan, but it's the same price as Pitts. It's just really hard to get there.
I think that's why you play Fant, because why would you ever play him over Pitts?
Right. If you're making your roster and you got these high, expensive receivers, you got a couple of expensive running backs, you really need a punt tight end. If you're punting tight end, you're going to love who I'm going to talk about. But under 3,000, is there anybody you're like, I'm just going to punt him, hope for a touchdown, hope for 4 catches, and play it that way?
I was going to make a joke here because I'm looking. I just scrolled down and there's Tim Tebow there, and it just says no game.
Just
the fact that they just kept
no game. Just go away. Just go away.
No game. To be honest, I didn't even look this low because I just didn't need to.
You're going to love it.
Who is it?
Tyler Croft.
Oh my goodness.
Jets tight end, 2,500.
Yeah.
They shipped Chris Herndon out because Tyler Croft is so valuable. He had 2 touchdowns in preseason. He feels a little bit like a safety valve for Zach Wilson. I think he likes playing them, and you can see that he targeted him in the preseason. He had 2 touchdowns. You're at 2,500. You are reaching and squinting and trying to find anything. I think there's enough here with Tyler Croft at 2,500 that if you wanted to punt tight end, I'm good with doing it right there.
Okay.
You hate the Jets.
I get it.
It's got to be a build where you love everything else and you just want to punt tight end as a spot. You really want to be a little. I mean, everybody's going to have Pitts, so in GPP and cash. So I think that if you want to be different and it saves you 2,000 on Pitts and you can go somewhere else, you have to hope for a touchdown. Don't get me wrong. It's got to be a 435 touchdown line is the only way that it works. Don't get me wrong. He's not going to. We're not looking at 8 catches and 100 yards by any means, but I think there's enough action in the preseason. I think a rookie quarterback, I think that quick get the ball out of my hands to a tight end, is nice early in the season. I think they'll run a couple plays for that. Robert Saleh loves tight ends. We know that he coached with George Kittle. If you're punting, I think he's the way to go with your punt.
Yeah, I think I'd rather flip it and take Elijah Moore. Like I'd rather save the money there and then I'd rather play Kelsey and Moore as opposed to Croft and whoever.
Or you'd rather play Pitts in like a 3,000. It works both ways too. I do get it. I just, I like to give people options. And I think if you're going
it makes
people do punt tight end. If you're going to do it, I do it with Tyler Croft this week.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to punt, if you punt tight end because you just need the salary savings, getting the stone minimum is a good way to go.
We talked about defense a little bit in the cash game part of it. We think that people will gravitate towards Jacksonville just because they're playing Houston. The Niners are maybe a little bit too expensive. There's a couple of cheaper defenses that I really like that I'd go instead of Jacksonville. I actually like both defenses in the Chargers Washington football team game. I think that we talked about how Fitz is better than they've had, but likes to force things. I like that. Derwin James is back. I always mess it up. Joey Bosa is playing. I think the Chargers can get after the quarterback. I like that. And I think the Washington football team at 3,200, anytime you're going to give me that front seven, Chase Young is an absolute monster. I think he's going to be defensive player of the year. I think it's going to be that good of a year for Chase Young. The thing with the Chargers, I love Justin Herbert. I think he's great, but it's their first game with a new scheme. There's a whole new scheme, new offensive coordinator, new head coach. Sometimes it gets a little bumpy. And I think you get the 10 a.m. kickoff time. I think that the Washington football team might make some plays here, especially in the first half, as the Chargers kind of get into it. Austin Eckler is probably going to play, but has that hamstring thing. I think that Washington might be the best defense in the league, and at 3,200, that's something that I'm just can kind of go to pretty easily.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, and you didn't even throw in the whole West Coast travel for the early game. I get that. Why do you think the Bills are cheaper than the Steelers?
I don't think they should be, but that's a really good question. Probably because Ben throws every pass like 4 yards, and there's no way to make plays now. But I think everybody just loves the Steelers defense year after year after year, and they're just kind of like, oh, the Steelers defense. I think they'll be good again. I'd play Buffalo over them this week. I don't love going against Josh Allen anymore. I finally got to the point last year where like, all right, fine, I'm gonna stop making the Josh Allen's gonna make mistakes line and just the dudes just do. He had that game against the Niners. I forget what week it was, and I'm like, holy crap, this guy's really really good now. Like I finally can admit when I'm wrong, and I did not think Josh Allen was gonna be this good. I'm not gonna play a defense against a quarterback that I think is that good.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills are 2,500 against Roethlisberger, who you said doesn't throw that far, but I feel like
but forces stuff too.
He forces stuff, and he's like completely immobile at this point. So if they can get to him, then any sort of fumble can happen. But they're $100 more than the Jets. Like that doesn't make sense.
You really are picking on the Jets a lot. What have they ever done wrong to you?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, how long?
Let me get the book out.
Yeah. So I like the Chargers. I like Washington. I also like the Vikings. Are the 3 defenses that I'm playing in this range. They're 3,000. Their front seven is really good. Danielle Hunter is back. I think Joe Burrow is just going to not be mobile for a while. I think that there's a lot of bad stuff in him camp. I don't buy into that too much. I think he'll be fine. I think fantasy wise, he's going to throw the ball a lot, but like, give me the team is going to throw the ball a lot, dropping back with an immobile quarterback in a game that I think they're going to be losing. Like, give me that in the second half at 3,000. So Chargers, Vikings, Washington are my 3 go-tos on defense this week.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great calls. I don't think there's anything that I don't think there's a cheap one that everybody's going to go to. I think it's going to be that range though, basically like from the Jaguars up to the football team, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I can't believe we're at year 2 of football team.
Should be forever.
I think there's 8 finalists. I think football team was actually one of the 8 finalists too, which is actually kind of cool. So anybody else you want to talk about, any other games you want to talk about? I feel like we kind of eventually did end up hitting it all. I think it was kind of in a format that kind of worked out, kind of thinking out roster builds. Anybody else you want to talk about that we haven't mentioned that you think we left out that you want to hit?
No, I think we're good.
Beautiful. Well, thanks everyone for listening to week 1 of the NFL DFS Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. That was a mouthful, sponsored by WinBet. We do always appreciate everybody listening. We appreciate the questions. I think we hit all of them. We appreciate everybody downloading and listening also on the audio version. If you could please rate and review the podcast, we really appreciate that too. Helps a lot of people find the podcast, helps a lot wherever you may listen to us, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever it may be. If wherever you listen to us, please do rate and review. That'd be great. Also, other than that, we hope everybody has a really good week 1. We look forward to doing this all year long. I know that I love doing it. I think Andrew likes doing it, maybe a little less than I do because he has to deal with me. But other than that, we both really enjoy doing it. We always talk about how it's one of the fun things we do at this job. Sure. So it's great. Good luck to everybody. We look forward to next week. We'll have results to talk about. We'll have week 2 to break down, targets and all that kind of stuff. So it should be fun. Good luck to everybody this week, and glad the season's starting. Look forward to chatting with you all year. Take care.